Welcome back to the Art of Survival podcast, a podcast where each week we take a novel and analyze thematic events and their relation to the outside world today. This week, our novel is the one and only Station 11 by Emily St. John Mandel. Now, if any of you listeners at home have read this novel before, I'm sure you can see where we're going with this, and slight spoiler for those who haven't read it before, it relates to COVID-19, the giant pandemic happening right now. Anyways, let's move on to our first subject today, faith and its interaction with our brains. If you look throughout the ages, there has been one thing that has consistently held humans together, and that one thing is faith. If you go all the way back to 5500 BCE, the first ever religion was formed, a religion today known as Hinduism. Then, as you continue to go forward through time, all the way up to current day, around 83% of the global population fall under one of the 12 classical religions. That begs the question, what is faith? A simple Google search will lead you to believe that faith is complete trust or confidence in someone or something. However, is this truly what faith should be depicted as? What leads to someone to have this complete trust? When looking through the past, we see a pattern, and that pattern is faith. Faith is heavily connected to the human psyche and how our brains perceive unforeseen stimuli and has formed the backbone of our societies for centuries. The human brain is extremely complex, so much so that science still doesn't fully understand it. However, faith gives us a glimpse into how our brains function when given new and unknown stimuli. This is known as a person's modus operandi, simply put, a person's way of doing something. We can go back into the past, back to the 2nd and 3rd centuries to view a primal belief system, Maori. This was one of the first faith-based systems humans developed, and it was based upon a system of faith put into deities. There was an Earth Mother and a Sky Father, as well as deities for the sun and all the different moon phases. They could not describe the natural phenomenon through any logical means, and as such, they connected these events to something that they could understand. This connection is the key to faith in the real world and in the novel Station 11. In the novel, our characters undergo a traumatic experience. They witness a majority of the 7+ billion people on Earth die to a brutal pandemic. As such, those who survive attempt to search for something, anything to explain why such a thing could or would happen. This is most evidently seen in the character of the Prophet, who as a child grew up with a mother who used faith to explain away every death and every consequence of the plague. The child soon adopted this same belief, and as he grew older began to grow more extreme, claiming that those who did not follow this faith are the reason the plague occurred. Of course, this is not the case, as the pandemic was caused by a virus. However, that is simply the boy's modus operandi due to his mother being unable to explain the catastrophe and chaining herself to a radical ideology. Similar events have occurred all throughout history. We can look to the Crusades in the Middle Ages, where faith was weaponized due to the radical beliefs of a group of individuals. And in the modern day, we can see faith heavily connected to politics, with 91% of the 116th Congress of the USA claiming to have some religious affiliation. Faith, however, is not a bad thing. Many characters in the novel, as well as in real life today, simply use faith to answer questions. In the novel, we saw one character praying over a corpse that they found to hopefully grant them safety in the afterlife. This idea of faith being used as a coping mechanism and as a catalyst for growth during harrowing times can be seen in today's world due to the COVID-19 pandemic. This topic will be the focus for our next segment of the podcast, where we will discuss the modern-day response and experiences of the pandemic.
Hello everybody. In this podcast, we will be discussing Station 11 by Emily Mandel and how the pandemic that occurs in this novel, as we are all experiencing one today, can have various effects on people. Being in a pandemic leads to huge changes in our daily lives, and as we are humans, we find ways to cope with the struggles that come along with change. In the novel, not only are the characters in a pandemic, but they also struggle with other things such as the electricity going out everywhere, the ability to communicate with others, and much more. To deal with this, Many of the characters portray their struggles through different forms of art. Because most of the characters were in a play together prior to the pandemic, performing plays is their main way of being able to express themselves. Connecting us to the bigger picture of keeping faith and hope, art is something that the characters can connect to and hold on to, which gives them hope for the future that something good will happen. Having this unifies everyone together, not only because they're all share hope, but because they're all holding on and relating to the same form of hope, which could help their survival even more. Comparing the novel to modern day, going through a hard time can seriously affect people mentally, emotionally, and physically. In fact, when people go through traumatic events, such as simply finding a way to survive, in a pandemic in this case, the body can actually start to shut down if not given enough of the nutrients your body is used to. Having motivation or the energy to keep going can be a huge struggle, and simple things to keep your energy levels up is giving your body glucose or sugar because that actually fuels your body. Systems within your body, such as the nervous system, is one part of your body that slowly stops working when going through a constant time of trauma, and it is hard to revive your physical problems, but it is possible. As all those effects are physical, the emotional, mental ones can include lack of sleep, lack of motivation, or just more struggling overall.
Thank you, Kylie, for that wonderful discussion on faith and how that kind of relates to the modern world. We are now going to switch it up to talk about survival and death. So, as we have learned that in Station 11, it takes place in the middle of this worldwide virus called the Georgia swine flu, which has wiped out approximately 99% of the world. This book examines close and personal deaths as well as worldwide global deaths. Right off the bat, we see one of the main characters, Arthur, and he dies from a heart attack. Even though he dies within the first chapter, he does appear a lot through the rest of the book because he's connected to the other characters in various ways. Like, for example, when he died on stage, he was in front of his fellow colleague Kristen, as well as the audience member Javine. The other characters, such as Miranda and Clark, they had known Arthur in a different part of their lives and had heard about his death. And kind of relating back into the world that we are currently living in, many people are dying worldwide due to a pandemic. And although Arthur died before the pandemic, the people who are alive are dealing with not only his death, but worldwide death. People deal with death in many different ways in this novel, and we get to see how they deal with it. People, not only the characters that we see in this book, but in the world, grieve in different ways, whether that's physically, emotionally, behaviorally, or mentally. We all grieve in different ways and at different times. Some people might grieve right after a death occurred or some months after. We see the characters grieve in pain, loneliness, anger, disbelief, confusion, and many more emotions. People, whether they know the person who had died or are just aware that hundreds of thousands of people die every day, it is still really painful, especially if the one who dies is close to you. And I think the people these days in this generation don't really take in the full aspect of death. When people who aren't close to us die, we don't really feel that loss of life. We just kind of have it in the back of our head that they're no longer with us. And I think that life is very precious. So when an individual's life is taken, people grieve to that death in different ways, whether they know that person or not. Another topic that we are here to talk about today is survival. And with death comes people who survive the death, as many of the characters in the book went through, or are in the process of surviving or trying to stay alive. People who are surviving or have survived something traumatic in the past, they tend to bring faith into why they survived. Like, why are they still alive? What is the reason for it? Like, who saved them, per se. In this novel, it depicts how closely survival and death are related. The characters are trying to survive and avoid death, and as we look into this novel and compare it to the world that we're living in today, we are only trying to do the same. Of course, the conditions are kind of different because COVID didn't wipe out the whole entire world, but the methods for survival are similar. People are wearing masks, or wearing gloves, or wearing face shields, and so much so we were at a point where the world had a shortage of hand sanitizer, and one small bottle was up to $20 or $30. The individuals that are hoping to survive and that they live through this deadly pandemic are going through the surviving process. And they go through different measures to stay alive, and in order to stay alive, you must learn to survive and find a way around dying, per se. And that's all I have for you today. And now we're going to switch it up and hear from Iris, who will be doing an interview.
That was Kate, thank you. We learned so much about death, grieving, and survival, and how people deal with them not only in the book, but in real life as well. Now, hello everyone, I'm Iris, and welcome to an exclusive interview with Miss Kirsten.
Hi Iris, thanks for having me.
Kirsten is a young lady who's with the Traveling Symphony. After the Georgia flu collapsed, all of society, she survived. How are you doing today, Kirsten?
I'm alright. Me and the symphony are having a performance tonight, actually, so I have something to look forward to at least.
Oh yeah? What are you performing?
A Midsummer's Night Dream.
Oh wow. Do you like doing your performances?
I definitely do. I mean, it just keeps me going. It gives me something to think about. The pandemic started when I was only 8 years old, so this is basically everything I know. I was a child actor back in the day, so this also reminds me of when things were normal.
I see. You must miss it. So, Kirsten, today we are talking about the connection between art and survival. Tell me, do you have a family?
No, I don't really. I mean, my parents never came back after they went out looking for supplies, and my brother died shortly after. I was only 8 years old when this all happened, but when the symphony found me, that's when I really found my second family.
Family is what you make of it. Tell me, what part do you play in the symphony?
I'm an actor.
Do you like to do anything else?
I mean, there's not much else to do these days. This is what helps me live. This gives this life some purpose and meaning beyond the flu and the death. And I get to create something in all this nothing. When I was a kid, I wanted to star in movies. I was in this play with this famous actor. His name was Arthur Leander, in A Midsummer's Night Dream. This was the last thing I did, and I want to preserve that memory and share it with others to give them hope like it gave me.
Art is such an important part of surviving. In my world, we had a terrible pandemic as well, and so many people were able to create so many different things. Throughout history, art has saved numerous lives and cultures. Do you think art is a staple of survival and preservation?
Art is music and painting and writing and so much more. And every time someone creates something, it etches a little bit into history. So the things we create during hard times gives us a purpose and a reason to keep culture alive. Without art, culture wouldn't even exist, and what's the point of surviving without living?
That's really inspiring. Thank you. Well, that's all I have for you today. Thanks for coming, and thank you for listening to this podcast.